So we're very lucky to have Erin here today to talk a little bit about her role. So Erin, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I work as a psychologist in a private practice in Kedron. I'm there full time, so it's 5 days a week. At the moment, we're all working remotely with everything going on, which has been interesting, a bit of a change. Outside of work, I live with my husband and we have a dog, and enjoy all things dog related. Usually kind of like spending time with family and friends. That's a bit different at the moment too, obviously. But otherwise, I'm a bit of a homebody, so it's not been too bad recently.
Right. So Erin's she's a general psychologist, but she's done extra study to become an
Yeah.
educational and developmental psychologist. Can you tell us what's the difference between the two?
Yeah. So this is a really good question because I think it's not a well-known specialization. So basically, educational and developmental psychology is a specialization within psychology. So general psychologists usually follow what's called a 4+2 pathway. So it's 4 years of study and then a 2-year like internship kind of program that they do. To become an educational and developmental psychologist, we do the 4 years of undergraduate study. So it's a 3-year bachelor and then an honours degree. And then we do a 2-year master's degree in educational and developmental psychology. And then after that, we do a 2-year registrar program, which is basically working as per usual, but we have regular supervision and increased professional development requirements in that area of training. And there's like certain competencies that we need to tick off to get that. So basically, educational and developmental psychology specializes in working across the lifespan, but sort of with a developmental framework, I guess. So often we work with kids and teens as well as like pregnancy and parenting kind of stuff. But we also work with adults around like life transitions, adjustments, understanding their own history, that sort of thing. It's also kind of, we've got extra training in psychological assessments, so things like assessing for learning difficulties or cognitive assessments or developmental assessments. Yeah, so I guess it's a different specialization. There are other specializations like clinical psychology or forensic or health or sports psych, neuropsych. Um, so, yeah.
And what drew your interest towards educational and developmental psychology?
Yeah, I think I just have always been a big fan of early intervention. Like, it just makes the most sense to me to support people through early parenting or childhood kind of things rather than wait until it becomes a bigger problem. I think I've always been interested in working with kids and parents as well. Like, that's something I've always been really interested in, and I think providing support through some of those developmental transitions is normal stuff that we all go through, but often is stuff that's really stressful and challenging. So things like adjusting to parenthood or going through challenges with pregnancy or changing jobs, changing schools, like those kind of transition moments that are sort of normal developmental things. But I think that's when people need a lot of support. And so I think I just always was interested in the way that people develop and that kind of early intervention framework.
So from what you're saying, you see, sorry. So from what you're saying, you see people from across the lifespan. So from very young
Yeah.
to, to children who are going to school, parents who are
Yeah.
going through parenting, and all the way through the lifespan. Um,
Yeah.
what kind of services do you guys provide? Is it more one-on-one, family counselling?
Yeah. So our practice mostly does one-on-one. We do some like they're not myself, but one of the other psychologists does some couples counselling stuff, and we do a little bit of family counselling. It's a bit of a tricky framework in private practice because there's different Medicare rules and things for family counselling, but we do a little bit of that where we can. So mostly it's one-on-one work. Obviously working with kids and teens, that's a little bit different because parents are more involved usually, even when it's kind of working one-on-one with the child. So we do a lot of one-on-one therapy. We provide assessment services as well for lots of different presentations and different concerns that people might have.
So I guess a couple of general questions. So how do parents know if their children need to see a psychologist?
So there's lots of different reasons, I guess, that a child might need to see a psychologist. So some of the common ones we get is if parents notice, or sometimes a teacher might notice or someone else, but if they notice that a child is having difficulty with big emotions, so like they might get upset or angry a lot, they might be struggling with anxiety, like if they're, really hesitant to try new things or nervous meeting people or talking in front of people, those sorts of things, worrying a lot about stuff. They might have difficulty regulating those feelings, so difficulty calming down or settling, difficulty with sleep or with children's behaviour. So if kids are, if parents are struggling with like defiance or aggression or difficulty with routines, those sorts of things. There might be concerns with development, so if parents are noticing if their child is maybe behind on some of the developmental milestones or ahead actually, or if they're struggling with things like social skills, struggling to settle into school, or other big kind of life changes, I guess. So maybe a parent separation or grief, if there's been a death in the family or something, bullying, all sorts of things. So basically, I guess it's, parents know their kids better than anyone else. So if parents are noticing any of those kind of concerns, mostly around like emotions or developmental kind of things, but otherwise, if there's been some big life changes, that can be useful then too.
So then what can a psychologist do for, say, a child with learning difficulties? If the parent has noticed that there might be, or a teacher has noticed that a child's a little bit delayed in some of the learning, what should a parent do?
It's something that, and I guess as an educational and developmental psychologist, that's one of the things that we specialise in. Obviously, that's part of education and development. So we would normally help by conducting some assessments. So this would involve like an interview with the parents and the child, asking about their history, what sort of things they struggle with. We would also normally talk to the teacher and probably do like an observation at school where we'd kind of, watch how the kids are going, have a look at some work samples, all of those sorts of things, as well as doing some standardized assessments. So it would be things like a cognitive assessment and an academic assessment. So what all of this does, I guess, is gives us lots of information about why that child might be struggling. Because I think that's often the really hard thing is when kids don't know or parents don't know. Kids will often feel like they're stupid or they're, that they just don't get it or there's something wrong with them. And so when we work out, what it might be that they're actually struggling with at school, where are they getting stuck, we can identify something like a learning disorder or a developmental disorder like ADHD or autism or something like that, or some other sort of cognitive delay. So understanding what it is, I think, then helps us provide targeted support. So depending on what the concern is, being able to educate parents and teachers around what kinds of supports that child might benefit from. So whether it's, a referral to an OT for handwriting sort of skills or speech pathology or adjustments in school that might be helpful with timeframes or, phonological awareness interventions and those sorts of things. So there's lots of different interventions that can help kids at school, but I think it's kind of working out where are they getting stuck and what the problem is to start with. Often too, when we do those assessments, we'll look at patterns of strengths as well. So, rather than it being all focused on what are the things that they struggle with, but it's being able to then use those strengths, I guess, to help accommodate for some of those difficulties.
Yep. Great. That sounds really good.
Yeah.
And then I guess another thing is one of the questions that I, as an occupational therapist, get asked often is in relation to separating from parents in the morning, so children who are getting dropped off at school and they're having they're struggling to separate and transition to the beginning of school. So do you have any tips for parents around that?
Yeah, so this is something that, like you said, we get a lot too. It's a really common thing that I think a lot of parents struggle with, particularly when kids are starting school and it's all kind of new and overwhelming. So, a few key tips, I guess, are one of the big things is probably building a good relationship with the teacher. So for the parents to get to know the teacher really well. If it's, starting school, having the child meet the teacher before they start and those sorts of things. But also I think sometimes it helps then dropping the child off to someone, to a person. So whether it's having a friend meet them at the gate or dropping them to where the teacher is or to the office or something. So they kind of feel like they're being handed over to someone and feeling a little bit more secure rather than just kind of being dropped off at the gate. So sometimes that helps if kids are feeling a bit overwhelmed or a bit sort of struggling with separating from the parents. Having a consistent drop-off routine is really important too. So I think, keeping it as much the same as possible, leaving around the same time, dropping them off at the same place to the same person, kind of helps settle kids into it a little bit better, just because they know what to expect, I think, then, and they kind of get used to that routine. And probably the other thing is, sometimes it helps for the child to be able to take something special of the parents or of theirs to school with them. So, one of the things that I sometimes do is get, you can get those little like key rings or bag tags that you can put a little photo in. So sometimes having them put a photo of the family or of mum and dad, or to take, a note maybe that a parent can write for them in the morning, or something they can take of the parents or from home, that, maybe check with the teacher too to make sure that that's okay with them as well, to have it in the classroom. But to have something little that they can take with them sometimes helps ease that transition a little bit too.
So kind of maintaining that connection between the parent and the child, even though they're in a different environment.
Yeah,
without the parent.
Absolutely. And there's a really cute kids book called The Invisible String that I use all the time. That's a really good little book for any sort of separation, but is really good for that transition to school, because that's kind of exactly what that talks about, is maintaining that connection even though they're not physically together.
And I guess another question, so moving up the age range to teenagers,
Yeah.
if a parent is worried about a teenager, whether that's anxiety, depression, aggression, how do the parent encourage the teenagers to kind of see a psychologist?
Yeah. It can be tricky sometimes. It depends a lot on the teenager too, I think. So I think generally, we don't want to force them to attend, because you kind of don't want them to associate it with a negative thing. But what I often do is, advise parents to just to have an open conversation about it. Teens are kind of, old enough to be able to engage in some of those conversations, if you make it age appropriate. But have a conversation about what they're noticing, what their concerns are, why they think a psychologist might be helpful. And then I think it can help to give the teenager some decision-making power in this. So, for example, giving them the option to kind of try it out, to come for 1 or 2 sessions and see if it's okay for them, if it's a good fit, because often it's not as scary as they might think it is. Or, psychology practices will often have like blurbs for each of their psychologists on their website. So sometimes what I encourage parents to do is to let the teenager have a look at the blurbs and like they see if they can identify someone that they feel like might be a good fit for them, or someone that they feel like they could relate to a little bit better. So I think sometimes just like including them in that decision rather than, ambushing them and just bringing them in or anything doesn't usually set it up well. So I think just kind of including them in some of that can be really helpful. If they're really against it, there's often no point pushing it because teenagers can be very stubborn, and so they'll often come in but they just won't engage, they won't talk, and it just sort of sets it up to be a negative thing that they then don't want to come back. And so I think as much as you can, kind of having that open kind of conversation and encouraging it and giving them some choice in the matter. But if they're really against it, it's pretty hard to shift them on that.
Is there anyone the parent could kind of refer to, whether that's someone at school or maybe the teachers, and then getting a referral pathway from there?
Yeah, definitely. So I think GP is often a good first port of call, particularly if the family has a good relationship with their GP, because they usually will know all the local practices and be able to do up a referral for them. But otherwise through school, most schools and most high schools in particular will have either a guidance counsellor or a chaplain or someone in pastoral care, and so usually they're able to link them in with psychologists, or they might just be an easier first step where they can do some of that initial work in maybe a more familiar environment where it's a little less scary. But certainly schools, are well placed and are usually linked in with some local services. To be referred to a practice, the most common way that people come is through the GP, but schools can certainly start some of those initial steps.
So can we talk a little bit about the referral pathways and maybe some of the funding options?
Yeah. So the most common referral pathways that we get are through a GP mental health care plan. So this comes under Medicare services. So basically to access that, you just need to see your GP. Usually you need to book like a longer consult, but they'll ask you some questions about symptoms and, what you've been noticing, and usually get you to complete a couple of questionnaires. And then that gives people access to 10 Medicare rebatable sessions per calendar year, so from January to December. The GP will normally refer to a particular practice that they are linked in with or work closely with. You don't have to go to the one that they recommend. You can pick your own one, but otherwise, sometimes it's helpful to go with whoever the local GP recommends. Or you can recommend, you can say to your GP if you want to go to a particular person, if you've, heard about them through other people or through the school or whatever. So that's the most common one that we get. So usually it's an out-of-pocket fee. Some practices will bulk bill with concession cards and things like that. Probably the next most common one we get is if someone has NDIS funding, then that's something that can be used on psychology services. So that works the same way with all other kind of NDIS services, is just doing up a management plan and getting some of that information sent over to us, and then we can kind of liaise with whoever manages the plan from there. And otherwise people can come privately. So either if you've got private health insurance, then sometimes they will cover psychology sessions depending on what sort of level of cover you have and things like that. Or, if you don't want to go through any of the funding kind of schemes, people are obviously welcome to come privately without a referral or anything. They can just come in and book themselves in. It's just that obviously then you don't get any money back through Medicare or anything. It's all out of pocket.
And then I guess, do you have any, we'll probably have to wrap up soon, so do you have any last comments or some advice that you would like to share with our families?
Look, I think like one of the things that I said before and that I often kind of advocate for parents is that parents know their kids better than anyone else. I think they often get caught up in trying to find the expert opinion or find the right thing, and I think if parents are ever concerned, that's enough to know that they might need some extra help or might need some support. I'm I think there's a lot of worry from parents about judgments or about doing the right thing. And, you know, psychologists, our whole job is to kind of be non-judgmental and be supportive. And I really like that about that job. I think, like, being able to be trusted by parents and by kids and teens, and kind of walk them through all of those things and help them with things that they're struggling with. So I think, you know, advice to parents, I guess, is to seek help if they need it, you know, and it can only kind of help them be more confident and build some of those skills.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of our advices as well, that parents know the kids better than us. If we see them for an hour every so often, we can kind of create a picture, but parents know them best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess parents are often in that position to create the most change. So, you know, I often say the same thing working with parents, is that, you know, I can see them for an hour a week or a fortnight or whatever and kind of give them those tools, but really it's the family that then takes that on and goes home and implements it, and that's where we see real change happen. And I guess that's something I really like about working with families as well, is that we get to get involved in that whole system. So rather than working just one-on-one with a person, it's always so much more helpful and so much more valuable, I think, to get the whole system on board. So to get parents involved, to get teachers involved where it's appropriate, just to have this whole support network around a person, to be able to kind of maintain some of that change and that support.
And I think that's where parents sometimes get a little bit overwhelmed, because at home everything happens, and it can be quite challenging to know what to target. So, you know, having professionals like a psychologist there and saying, you know, this might be a particular area that we could focus on, or these are some of the strategies that might help with a range of things. That's really helpful as well, to make sure the family is not feeling too overwhelmed.
Definitely.
So, Erin, do you have a place where people could find more information about you, or your organisation that you work for as well?
Yeah, definitely. So the organisation that I work for is called Accoras Psychology. So our website has a bit of information about the services we provide. So I can probably send that to you. Might be easier than spelling out the website. But we do have too, on our Kedron page, you know, we've got a list of all our psychologists and kind of little blurbs about what we specialise in and special interest areas and those sorts of things. We also have a social media page that's just called Accoras, so it's ACCORAS. So I think we're on Facebook and Instagram, so sometimes that has some good information about the services we provide and those sorts of things. And people can always, you know, they're free to give the clinic a call, and our admin team are wonderful and are always really happy to have a chat and provide some more information to people if they want it.
Well, thank you so much, Erin, for spending your valuable time today, and just talking about your role and some tips for families as well. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.